Hey everybody, Alex of BP Autosports here again for episode 3 of building 2JP's turbo system. So in the first 2 episodes, we built the merge collector and we located the turbo. So the next step in the order of operations for building an exhaust manifold is to build the primaries. So I have our mocked up head flange and merge collector over here on the bench, and I have a few of the pieces that are out and ready to start becoming the primaries. So let's take a look. All right, you can see I have everything on my PRL Motorsports 2JZ GTE purge block. And this is a real nice piece, makes it very easy for final assembly with the 6 purge ports on the bottom side or top side. It has NPT threads on either side. And the correct bolt pattern for a 2JZ GTE head flange. In addition to being a conduit for argon in the back purging process, the fact that this is a 1.5 inch thick block of aluminum also acts as a heat sink to keep heat out of the head flange, or to keep it from warping, I guess would be the way to put it. I have a few pieces cut or out on the bench currently, and I have this head flange fastened down via 1, 2, and 3, 4 fasteners just for the time being. I don't have all of them tightened down, as this will be going on the purge block, onto the razor, back to the purge block, etc., as you guys will see here in a little bit. So I think this video may be more of a time lapse, at least for the first part of it, than it is a step-by-step. So you get to see me build all of these primaries first, and then secondly, we'll come back and I'll go over different little tips and tricks with you. So without further ado, let's get started. we have 5 out of the 6 primaries built, ready to weld, and that leaves only number 1 left to do. I figured that I would take this opportunity to show you guys, or I guess to depict my thought process as I go through and build these. So we need to get from here to here, or vice versa. So let's take a look at what we have. I have a few assorted bends, a couple of different cut ones at different angles, but I'll typically start off with 90-degree bends and work from there. So let's put these on here. So let me get a better angle here. So if I put my two 90s on there, it does not line up with where the port on the head flange is. I'll put these back up here real quick, show again. This 90-degree bend where my pinky is, it is pointing essentially between ports number 1 and number 2 on the head flange. So I will typically eyeball it or kind of guess and check. When you do this for long enough, you become accustomed to kind of eyeballing these angles and figuring them out that way. So it looks like it is a little bit less than a quarter of this bend where my pinky is at that needs to be removed to get it to line up with the number 1 port on the head flange. So I'll take this 90 and turn it, let's start with a 75-degree bend and see how that looks, and then we'll go from there. Alright, I have our 75-degree bend here, I have our 90, and I have a section of straight to kind of guess or judge against the bend on the head flange there. So I hold this up and try to index it. We see that 75 doesn't quite get us there. We need to kick it back a little bit farther. So this little discrepancy in our angle right here, I believe, will equate to an 80-degree bend as opposed to a 75. So let's go ahead, I'll get another one of these long radius 90-degree bends. I'll make an 80-degree bend and we'll try again. Alright, back again. I have our 80-degree bend now. So let's try the 90, the 80, and our straight and see if it lines up with the bend on the head flange there. So take these two, hold our straight up, and that looks like a match right there. So we can rotate it a little bit more. Yeah, there we go. So I will prep these pieces, prep this piece, and get them tacked up, and then we can figure out the length of the straight that we need to connect the 80 to our bend on the head flange. Alright, I have my pieces, they are prepped and ready to get tacked on here. So one thing that I do sometimes is, if you can see the inside of that pipe there, I'll draw a little face, kind of a little Easter egg type thing, but I digress. Alright, so what we'll do now is take these pieces, and I like to keep a section of straight around. As you guys saw when I was mocking these pieces up, I'll use it as kind of an indexing pointer, if you will, as to where the bend is going. So right about there seems to be where this thing needs to be. So I'll go ahead and tack this 90 on here first. Alright, our 90 is tacked. Now we'll take the 80, index it appropriately here. Something along those lines is a good starting point. So we'll tack this like so. Yep, and now let me try to find a little bit longer section of straight that we'll use to make up the, oh, I don't know, 3 inches that are left to go on this expanse here, and we'll go from there. I found a little bit longer section of, this is 1¼ inch schedule 10 304 stainless, so not the same material that we are building the manifold out of, but the outer dimension is the same, which allows me to index it appropriately off of the pieces that we're building this manifold with. So if I put this up here, I see that we are in line with our bend off of the head flange. We're just a little bit short, which will now allow me to take my handy tape measure, measure this distance, which is right at 7½ inches. And now I can take a piece of my Schedule 5 321 stainless straight, cut it to that length, tack it in, and then we'll be fully fabricated. One of the tricks that I've learned over the years that I've been doing this is to overcut the length of the straight sections that you're cutting. What I mean by that is, say we have 7½ inches of straight that we need to fill this gap right here. I will cut it at 7 9/16 as opposed to 7½. And that extra 1/16 of an inch allows for a little bit of shortening of that section as I'm beveling it and putting my little lands on the end without having the piece come up short when I go to tack it in here. So I'll go cut a piece to 7 9/16, get it prepped, come back in a few minutes, we'll get this tacked in, and then we can look at this fully fabricated manifold. I have my 7½ inch straight section cut and ready to go on the manifold. So I will take my bend at the head flange and I will take my straight, tack them together so that way I'm not contending with 2 pieces and trying to fight them into place. And once I have them tacked, then it will be time to make them part of this assembly, and then we can do our final test fit. So I'll take my pieces, I'll line them up, and I'll come in and I'll do a little fusion tack on one side, rotate it 180 degrees, do a little tack on the other side. Alright, I have my head flange band, I have my piece of straight tacked together. So now I will tack them into the rest of this assembly here, like so. Get them lined up, and even when you do pair pieces together like this, it still ends up being a massive balancing act to get them to fit properly. But once you do, you hold still and you tack them. There's one. Once you have a tack on, you can do any little fine adjustments that you need to. Come down here, tack at the head flange. I'll double up tack so I have at least 2 on all of the joints except for the collector and the head flange, just to make it easier to get them off. So flip over, and do a tack here. And do one final one right here. And there we are. So let me flip this back over and you can take a look at it in its entirety. There's our last primary there, looping around the front. And 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are all on the bottom there. Spin this around, flip it upside down, spin it around. You can see all of the other ones wrapping around on the bottom side. And we'll flip it back over, get the rear perspective. Thing looks pretty sweet. So let's pop this off of the purge block there, put it down on the rig and see how it looks in there. There we are. All 6 primaries tacked up as you saw over on the bench, and it fits into the chassis exceptionally well. So it's clearance all the way around. Clearance to right there, front, and it's kind of hard to reach on the back, but that's the oil galley. That's where you feed oil up to the turbo on these things, or on these engines rather. Coming up around, looks sweet from all different angles. Plenty of clearance for everything. There we go on the back side. Looks sweet from all different angles. So, the next order of business will obviously be welding all of these primaries together. And when you're doing a custom manifold like this, it makes it a little bit more difficult than a production one where you have a fixtured collector location, fixtured turbine flange location. This, if I were to break all of the primaries off at once, then everything is just a hodgepodge pile of different parts that makes it much more difficult to put back together for the final assembly. And by the time all of that is said and done, I have all my primaries welded, I fit them back in all their respective locations, and it's time to finish weld at that point. So why don't we pull the manifold back out of 2JP, take it back over to the welding bench. I'll pull one of the primaries off, I'll go through and weld it so that way you can see kind of the weld aesthetics that we're going to get out of this 321 stainless, and we'll go from there. Another quick note before I pull one of these primaries off of here is you can see that these pipes don't line up to the collector. Why is that? Don't fear, there's a reason for it. This is my compensation for the pipe shrinking and or moving as I weld it. Now as you apply heat and you melt these things together, they don't stay in the shape that they are fabricated in. There will be a slight variation to their final shape as opposed to their fabricated shape. So I've found out over doing this a ton of times that they will pull approximately 1/8 of an inch inward as you weld them. So this isn't a perfect science, it's just kind of a ballpark guess as you're doing it. I mean, as you guys can tell, I'm sure throughout this video, much of this is kind of a guess and check deal. But as I weld, so we'll use number 1 for example. As I weld it, it'll move, it will contort as I'm welding it, and at the end of it, it should pull this downward into a position that better matches the position on the merge collector. Now, if you build these so they fit perfectly as you're fabricating them, I would almost guarantee that they will not fit by the time that it is welded. So I do fit these rough at first. You can see it doesn't fit perfectly on the head flange, doesn't fit perfectly up here, but that is fine. As I go through and weld these, they will move, and these gaps and these purposeful misalignments will allow me enough play to tailor them to fit where they should, when they should. So I think I'm going to pull number 1, since that's the primary that we built as part of this video where I explained. Pull that off, and I will weld that. Then we'll fit it back up, get it tacked into place, and we'll be ready to move on from there. Alright, we have our number 1 primary welded off of the fan and ready to go back on the manifold. Now, I have not ground on this at all yet. This is straight after it's been welded. And if you remember, the large gap that we had there is now gone away. So it fits pretty well there. Fits alright at the head flange. And now I can grind on it and tailor it down into its final resting place. So why don't I do that now and check back in a moment. There we have number 1 fit up and on there pretty nicely. No overlaps, no huge gaps, no anything stupid that'll make this thing difficult to finish weld. You can see I have 2 and 3 pulled off. I did that just so it'd be a little bit easier to snake them out of there without having number 1 in place. So the next order of business will be to repeat the same process for 2 through 6. However, that will be in the next video. In the next episode, we will finish weld the manifold, put wastegates on, and potentially start looking at how to route the exhaust on this. I know this video was a little bit jumbled and not quite as concise as the rest of this build series, but bear with me, there was a lot to do in a short period of time with this video, so I did my best to film it all for you, but it'll get better from here. If you want to see the rest of this build come together, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and we'll see you next time.